Hello, everyone. My name is Salla Rantala. I'm from the Finnish Environment Institute in Helsinki, Finland, and I'm here with my colleague Brent Swallow from the University of Alberta, Canada, to tell you about our joint research on institutional approaches to governing forest data. So first a bit of background, then introducing a conceptual framework that we've developed to study the formation of institutions to govern natural resource data. We'll tell you about our application of the framework to case studies on the governance of forest data in Finland and Canada. And then finally, Brent will say some concluding remarks. So the background, what has spurred us to do this research is that there has been an explosion in the amount of precision of data on natural resources such as forest. And another big trend, there's a big push to open that data, especially public data, with big expectations attached to this trend. And given both those trends, there has been surprisingly little attention thus far from the perspective of institutional analysis in terms of how to govern those data on natural resources. So our conceptual framework departs with the argument that the governance systems for natural resources and related natural resource data are very much interlinked. And it's due to an understanding of data and information on natural resources as means to capture diverse values of the interests. So it's from that perspective, it can be understood that the actors interested in natural resource data are at least partially the same as the actors interested in the actual natural resources, and the same actors would be interested in the formation and design of institutions for governing natural resource data. And we also understand that those processes of institution formation are mediated by power relations between the actors, which are dynamic, as are the actor interests. We also distinguish ideas and discourses as a driver of institutional change. Ideas are understood here as solutions to collective action problems, and discourses are the language and practices through which the ideas are enacted. And we also acknowledge that institutions are usually seen as notoriously difficult to change, and this stickiness is related to path dependence, payoff structures from original policy proposals for the proponents, as well as other institutions at multiple levels in nested hierarchical systems, which mediate one institution can affect what happens, how much room there is to change another institution. And finally, we also see technology as a potential driver as new technologies render old institutions inefficient and unsuited. And so next we're going to apply this framework to the case studies of Finland and Canada, where in the case of Finland, the focus has been opening forest data through the reformation of the Forest Information Act, which is the single piece of legislation governing data on most of Finnish forests, most of which are owned privately by families and individuals, which is a striking feature of Finnish forest governance. And the other important feature is that there has been and there continues to be a heavy focus on forest production and extraction of wood. Although since the 1990s, as globally, also Finland, there have been other interests that have become increasingly important. So previous studies have documented these persisting coalitions in forest governance, one for the environmental values and one for the economic values of forests. And these coalitions have been met with huge global trends related to globalization of forest markets, bioeconomy, as well as open data and open government. And one could say that these trends collided in this process of reforming the Forest Information Act. And the starting point was the situation where forest data on these private forests in Finland was considered personal data of forest owners in the previous legislation. And the government had already started developing technology to facilitate sharing so that the forest owners could grant access to the forest data more easily, and companies could use it in marketing. And there was also this anticipated benefits for the bioeconomy, and also these discourses related to open data and open government in the broader framework. But the final push actually for the reformation process originated from the higher level institutional context, when the European Commission sent a written warning to Finland to open forest data as public environmental information. The actors involved tried to influence the process through the means that they had, but we saw an interesting splitting of the previous coalition for forest industry or extractive forest management that had been formed by the forest industry and forest owners. The forest industry was arguing for full and unlimited opening of the data in view of new economic benefits from this open forest data, whereas the forest owners continued to see it as their personal data that should be better protected. So finally, the compromise was a solution where forest data is by default open, but any information that can be connected to the forest owners, such as the boundaries of forest estates, etc., that still requires the consent of forest owners. So basically what we've seen in this process is an interesting balance of power shift due to this previous coalition for forest extractive forestry splitting up over new interests. And now over to you, Brent, for a review of the Canada case.
Thanks, Salla. There's two big contrasts. There are big contrasts between Finland and Canada in terms of forest governance as well as forest data governance, and the two are interlinked. Contrasting with Finland, 94% of all forests are owned by the Crown, which means federal government, a small amount, the 10 provincial governments and 3 territorial governments. So we've got 14 government agencies that have been defined by the Constitution as owning Crown land and therefore the forests on those lands. The focus has been on extraction, and then starting in the 1990s, more about sustainable forest management. The extraction and production emphasis has been enacted through agreements and concessions between forest companies and the Crown agencies, which means that the forest industries themselves are another actor in this system. Increasingly, there is recognition of the need for governments to pay more attention to treaty rights that were negotiated sometimes hundreds of years ago and sometimes are being negotiated now, and the need to implement the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and with that, more sharing among the 14 responsible agencies. Next slide, please. So thinking about this in terms of the relationship between forest governance and forest data governance is we have these 14 different responsible agencies for forest governance, who then become the 14 agencies responsible for forest data. There also are the private companies that collect data as part of the concessions they have, who are recognized as the owner of the data that they collect and that they just share with the government. And the other agencies that have interest here are the public, with concerns about data using those same lands for other uses like conservation and recreation, as well as Indigenous voices, which have a stake in this. So what has emerged is data sharing arrangements, data sharing between the 14 government agencies, and sometimes data sharing with the private companies and some opening in those, as well as data sharing and with First Nations. So maybe we move to the next slide and just wrap things up. So we see that we have this very dynamic situation, moving from kind of one state to another in the Finnish case, moving from more closed data to more open data. In Canada, we have seen some of the same external moves toward open government and open data, but that's really been limited by the federal provincial responsibilities, as well as the agreements that are held with private companies, as well as new institutions coming up, new interests, which are made in terms of First Nations. So the last comment I'd have about what we can learn from these cases is if we think about a continuum between closed and private data toward open and public data, sometimes that seems to be swinging through shared data, and in Canada case, maybe that's where we get stuck, or perhaps that moves on to more open data. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and note our addresses here if you want to get in touch with us, as well as we'd like to express our appreciation to the Academy of Finland for their support to this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.